if we see a proper reshuffle. If we don't, I think we're still at risk. Excuse me. Okay, I have to cut this slander off. People are consolidating and alliances are merging, in part because they don't have people that are willing to take up the mantle. Don't come in talking in the same way that the older players do.
Let's talk about that spherical polarization that you were talking about, that you mentioned a bit earlier. Could you give like some insight on what you mean by that, and if you still think that it's occurring at the moment, or if you think it's died down?
This is a very tough topic because it means different things to different people. And like even the term like House Stark, I especially within House Stark, but House Stark overall, have been a big advocate for alliance-based politics. And specifically, you can see evidence of that in how we handle our treaties. Almost every one of them is optionally chaining, because that's all non-chaining is it's optionally chaining. So we are never obligated to come in on behalf of your ally. For example, your Sword Coast, you are my ally. If you get hit, then generally, okay, like if you get hit because you're signed to TKR and you're getting hit because you're part of House, has no obligation under that treaty. Absolutely none, because we're not signed to TKR. Just like if, let's use Spectre as an example. If Eclipse gets hit, we're under no obligation to jump in and help Spectre in that war, because Eclipse isn't our ally. And so it's a general dislike of this sphere model that works well for some people, but a general dislike of this model of we're all going to only have relationships with the people we are immediately dealing with. So we're going to sign you, and you, and we're not going to talk to anybody else in terms of treaties or any of that. We are just signed to these people. There's nobody else. And we're going to operate as one unit, and then we'll reshuffle that unit every now and then. So you can see a rejection of that if you just look at House Stark on the treaty web, because we're signed to Freeman, however the hell you want to pronounce it. We're signed to FSO. We're in a separate little conglomerate with TSC and Arkham. And then we're signed to the horrifically looking IMES that is that side sphere with Spectre as well. You know, Spectre, Camelot, Rome, Gato, ROL, World Task Force, and then a bunch of other treaties that are tied into those alliances as well. Honestly, it's actually quite an atrocious part of the treaty web if you look at it. But we don't operate under that mechanism of abdicating FA. Don't believe in that. And so we'll work with our allies, but I don't want to be, we're not a protectorate, is the best way of putting that. And that's not how we're going to approach our FA. So sphere polarization more broadly, I'm assuming we're talking about the bipolarization within this game moving into just two conglomerate spheres. Is that accurate?
Yes, that's accurate.
Okay. So for a hot minute there, it was really looking, for most of last year, it was really looking like that's where the game was headed. And that is not, some people will tell you that's a good thing. Some people will tell you that's not a good thing, because people also have different views on what bipolarity is. If you look at bipolarity as two general broad coalitions, and sometimes wars still happen within those coalitions. So, for example, let's lump Rose Sphere, and I'm going to just blasphemy this whole thing. Rose and Cindy and Event Horizon are one, and then everyone else is another one. But like Guardian is still hitting BK sometimes, or TFP is still, like, there are still side wars within that coalition. Then maybe that's not terrible. But if we're looking at bipolarity as what I think it would genuinely be in this day and age, where, again, war and politics are not the priority, economics and growth are the priority, and so those side wars would be harshly discouraged, if not outright banned, because you're not going to sabotage, you're not going to sabotage your own sphere or your own group of collective allies. What it would actually be, in my opinion, is we would essentially have two different groups acting as spheres. There would be no wars within those spheres, and there would be a periodic war that would probably last a month or maybe 2 months, and then we'd get a 6-month nap, and that would happen maybe twice a year. And that's what the game would be. That is not healthy. That will never be healthy for the state of this game. It remains to be seen whether or not we can avoid having that happen, because mini-spheres have long been a held ideal, and for those unfamiliar with mini-spheres, it's this idea that we should have a bunch of really small spheres so that they're all about equally sized, or some can be larger, but the gist is that we've got a bunch of smaller spheres so that you can have 1v1 or 2v1 if we've got an extra large sphere. We can have a bunch of different unique wars. I don't know if that's ever an ideal that'll actually happen. I think the best we get is multipolarity, where you have 3, 4, 5 different axes that we operate on. I don't think you ever get up to like 8. Just not possible with the size of majors. But I think that we've backed away from that a little bit with this reshuffling. But honestly, what it's going to come down to is what happens after this current war against Rose. Because there are a bunch of treaties on this web that are going to have to get cut or moved around. Otherwise, yeah, we may still be in a rough area where certain people have some pretty large coalitions, and we need to look at bigger coalitions to deal with them. And that's ultimately the problem with these dog piles and things, is the only way to make yourself safe from a dog pile or from losing a war is to sign a bunch of people. And the more people you sign, the larger the other side has to get. And so eventually, if you've got enough people signed to one alliance, it has to be the whole rest of the game that comes in to try to take them down. So, all that to say, if we see a proper reshuffle, I know it got disrupted after the end of the war against Rose between TKR and Eclipse against Rose. If we get a proper reshuffle after that, then I think we're in the clear for a little while longer. If we don't, I think we're still at risk.
See, but you think if it were to happen, there, it doesn't mean that there's a point of no return, does it? Because there'll be that big war, and then surely people are responsible enough to break up hegemonies, like not be part of a hegemony, or do you not think that will be the case? We're both muted. Oh,
Okay. Are we back?
are we back? Was it
Can you
your
hear me?
turn to? Yeah, I can hear you. Was it your turn to get interrupted?
Okay. No, it was just my mic stopped working completely. Which is really weird.
Great timing.
Okay.
I
Yeah,
was about,
really. I know.
was a
It
bit,
just
I was a little bit worried that the question was like atrocious or something, and you're just dead silent.
no. I
Okay,
was
nah.
talking and I didn't. Apparently, I don't know what you heard or didn't hear, so I'll restart on that. I think a game-wide war would actually be pretty fun. Um, I don't think it'll happen yet.
Mhm.
Although it could, given Eclipse is tied to Spectre and Spectre is tied to a bunch of people, and so maybe we'll see what happens. But I don't think it's a point of no return, but I think it could very easily become a point of no return because people hold grudges. Most people hold grudges. There's a very easy possibility where we end up in a situation where the two sides, you never want to be the side that loses. That's the problem. Because if I start out as, let's just say they're evenly matched for sake of argument. They wouldn't be, but let's say they are. And let's say that I blitz you and I win. Well, you're not going to want to dissolve because I'm still a huge hegemony. And I'm not going to want to dissolve because if I dissolve, you now have a grievance to come after me with. And you can isolate my individual spheres and take them on one by one. So then you're going to blitz me for a revenge war. And I'm going to lose. And I'm not going to want to dissolve because, again, that leaves you in a fun position, but you don't want to dissolve because what if I want to hit you for hitting me?
Mhm.
So it can very easily become a situation where neither side wants to be the ones to step away. And without massive member backlash against that kind of thing, I don't think it could happen because we have a lot of alliances that are very individually enterprising, and as such would be able to break away from such a, one versus one scenario. But I think it would be tough to come back from that because unless it's incredibly deserved, whoever loses that war in a bipolarity situation is going to want to come back for more. And so it's a really weird situation where it's essentially prisoner's dilemma if you're familiar with game theory,
I'm
where
not.
both of us want to break apart, and that assumes people want to break apart into various spheres
Mhm.
again. But assuming that both of them want to break apart, but by being the one to break apart, they open themselves up to get wrecked. And so it never makes sense to be the first one to break apart
Yeah.
because if you do, you open yourself up to get screwed over.
I feel like that's kind of the whole point of resetting relations, though. And
Okay, I hate that term.
you hate that term? Why is that?
I hate that term. That was a piece of BS that Carthago kept pushing when House Stark hit Carthago. And
You get Vietnam flashbacks to this.
okay, so this was
No,
resetting relations.
Mhm.
This is not a situation where you just go, "Oh, our relations are reset." That's not how that works. What you're doing is you're paper macheing over whatever happened in the past. And so rather than actually talking through and resolving the problems, you're just trying to wave a magic wand to say, okay, we're good now. And it never works out in the long run unless you're really good at gaslighting yourself. And so go for it.
Okay, now you're on the losing side of the war. Are you not in a position to basically be the one to reset relations because the other side doesn't have a CB against you? And won't it work at that point?
It could be, but that also requires the winning side being willing to understand that the losing side is ready to move on. There are situations where the losing side may say, "Yeah, we're done. We don't want to hit you guys again." Winning side doesn't believe him and tries to hit him again anyway. But I think too, a lot of people have trouble moving on from revenge in that sense. As that, it's a very powerful CB because it's what drives most of our politics.
Yeah.
So it's possible, but I think what you're describing is less about resetting relations and more about just saying, for the health of the game, let's break this up. We can still have our individual grudges against each other, but let's not be two super hegemonies or hegemonies or however, again, pronunciation, not my strong suit. But if you sit there and you say individually, hey, we have a lot of issues. Let's just paper mache over them and reset relations. That's not how that works. Setting relations is taking the genuine time to discuss and get to know the people on the other side and actually reform your relationship with these people. It's not a term that you add on a peace treaty to say, oh, yeah, we're all good now. That's not how that works.
That does make a lot of sense.
Something that I'm still very salty about.
Yeah, I could tell a little bit. All right, I think we can move on from that then.
That's fine. I know this is probably pushing a little longer on
A
what you
little
were hoping
bit.
for.
I guess we can talk about Ron a little bit as well still. For people that don't know, well, I'm assuming everyone knows, but who knows, maybe there's people who should watch this who live under a rock. Lysander is currently the owner of Royal Orbis News, so could you maybe provide some details? Does anything for you anymore at all? Because I know Ron isn't super active anymore. You do post news like about the big events.
Excuse me. Okay, I have to cut this slander off.
Well,
So
comparatively to what the reporting isn't super active. You compared to what it was.
okay, let's take this in stride here.
All right.
Royal Orbis News is RON, RON.
Yes.
Royal Orbis News acronym makes sense. And so it is the premier news server. It is the largest.
For sure.
It has 2,600 people in it, roughly. That fluctuates, but it's generally between 2,500 and 2,600 people. at any given time. You could argue that there is a general decrease in activity, but I would argue that that comes with the game's general decrease in activity. As you can see, if you look at the active nations in the last 3 days, in mid 2023 we had 6,000. In mid 2024 we had 5,200. Now we're at below 5,000. There's a general drop off across the game. Now, if you're talking
Hmm.
about reporting activity, you would be accurate. And you would be accurate because I have the reporting team has been slimmed down, and we tend to stick on posting just the most major of news at this point because that's what really impacts the community. And Ron is less a news server at this point. Yes, it's in the name, but we are the community focal point of politics and war. And I say that without bragging. It is just what is an accurate statement. We generally have a pretty large congregation of your FAs, your alliance leaders, your alliance govs. And within the last week, I would say, especially with this war kicking off,
Yeah, it's
Ron
been
itself
popping
has been incredibly active,
for sure.
especially relative to where one could argue because we like the rest of the game, we drop off when you have less going on politically. When there's not a lot
Hmm.
being said, we don't we don't do much. And so recently we've really kicked up the activity in the server. And no, we don't post news super actively, although I will make a caveat here, and I will say that we actually tend to beat OCN, who has like 3 times the reporting staff that I do, and we still manage to beat them on most things. So, are we really falling behind? Relative to the rest of the news media, I would argue no. But really, my focus is more on providing that community a place to function, a place to engage. We've had a number of debates recently within the last
Hmm.
couple of days just over the CBs being brought in this Rose War, the problems of consolidation, game development in general. Like, that is where the conversation
Hmm.
happens, is Ron. And so, if you were to grade us as a news server specifically, I would still argue that we do better than the others. But are we necessarily the greatest at solely providing news? Um, that's
Up for
not
debate.
the priority. You're judging a
Yeah.
fish by its ability to climb a tree. My priority has been to have the community aspect continue to function, and the news just serves as providing topic starters,
Hmm.
and informing that community as they function. It's an apples to oranges comparison there because if you look at server activity, if you look at who is creating that server activity, I would argue Ron is far and away in a better position
Hmm.
than any other comparable server.
When I said activity is a bit down, I meant in comparison to Ron before. If you compare 2024, 2025, like, just compare the last 7 months before this global, it was, I won't say inactive because there was some conversation going on.
In terms of general server activity too, like recently, actually, I think we've done the best we've done in quite a hot minute.
Yeah, yeah, for
But
sure.
like you had in the past, like we also had when Drew did his thing, it was a spike. We had like 10,000
Yeah,
active nations in the last 3 days at that
before I
point when
played.
that happened. Right.
Hmm.
And then like 2021, 2022, you see over 6,000 people. Now we're down to the high 4,000s. And so a lot of that too, I would argue, is driven by older players who are kind of dipping from the game. And
Hmm.
so it's
Those are the most active ones, generally involved
right,
community stuff.
right.
So not only is the game player base lowering, the ratio of engaged to less engaged people in this game it's probably slid over into in favor of
Well,
the non-engaged.
that's what part of what we were talking about just the other day in Ron is there's people are consolidating and alliances are merging. And they're doing that in part because they don't have people that are willing to take up the mantle. If
Mhm.
I as an alliance don't have qualified people or any people who want to come work in Gov, I need to then go find another alliance who is having maybe similar problems but in different areas. Like, it doesn't help me if I'm
Mhm.
missing an IA and an EA and I go merge with somebody who's also missing an IA and an EA. But if there are areas where another alliance can patch my holes and I can patch their holes, then it makes sense to merge, and that's why people are doing it, is because there's a lack of interest
Mhm.
in moving up into government.
Something I think I've noticed a bit as well over time in multiple alliances I've been in. I feel like a lot of alliances slowly have that where they're eroding the activity. I actually wanted to ask you this as well about Ron.
I'm happy to do the smaller news servers one if that's what you want to do, but I think we
Mm,
spoke on the decline in terms of activity.
for sure, for sure. I actually want to ask something else first, though. Ron is not. It's not the most friendly place as a new player to visit. And you mentioned that it's a community server over a new server at this point. But do you not think that we could be a bit more welcoming to new players when they say something silly or something stupid or something that doesn't make sense instead of maybe berating them a bit? I guess berating is a big word, but
I'm gonna make two arguments here.
Mhm.
The first argument that I'm gonna make is that Ron specifically is an area that you take one or two tacks on. You either sit and you watch as a new player, you sit
Mhm.
and you watch the older players interact and you get a feel for things before you dip your toe into the water. And
For
you can
sure.
talk infrequently, and people do, and that's fine. You come by infrequently, watch actively. I don't care. You can watch all the fireworks that go on in the Balkans. That's why we named it the Balkans. Don't come in and start talking in the same way that the older players do. You are not as experienced in the game as they are, and the community, and this is not the Ron community. I'm going to make this is the second argument I'm going to make. This is a subsection, a broad subsection of the politics and war community. This is how the game is. This is not specifically Ron. Ron has more of a reputation for this, but it's also because we're a bigger server, and so we get more of it. You're always, for example, if your fans, you're always going to have 1% of your fans or your whatever, or let's even round, let's say 5%. 5% of the people that watch your stuff or interact with your stuff are always going to be the crazy ones. 5% of an audience of 100, you just mute, block, or isolate the 5 people that are acting dumb, and the rest of the community is fine. If you have 2,000 people, and again, not all of them are very active or engaged, a lot of them are just watchers, it is a lot harder to isolate 100 people that are acting in that manner than it is to isolate 5. And so that assumes that the percentage is 5%. It's probably a lot higher in the politics and war community. So you see this manifest in other areas. You see it manifest in the general attitude when, like we said earlier, when somebody gets kicked and they're down. You see it manifest in the general attitude towards micros and nanos. And this is a common thing throughout the politics and work community. So, yes, you could argue that Ron should do better, but it is difficult without me actively going in and spending 24/7 watching the chat and then start kicking the people who are problems, some of whom are alliance leaders or alliance government, and go from that to then a better community. Like, yes, if I wanted to know life watching what was being said, maybe I could make things better, but the reality is that's a broader politics and war community problem that has to be addressed with an improvement in the community before it can manifest itself into an improvement within Raw.